Welcome, and thank you for joining me for the second of my two-part series conversation with Airswift partner, immigration expert, and COO of EPG Migration. That is Bella Russell. Bella, thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, good evening. Thank you very much for having me again, Ryan.
Yeah, how are you? It's quite late over there in Sydney, isn't it?
Yeah, you can see it's a bit dark behind. It's about 9 o'clock, so bear with me. I'll stay awake for the next 45 minutes.
Please do. I'll try and keep you awake. And yeah, we're very grateful for you to giving us your time. So, Bella, last time we caught up, we looked at international recruitment strategies, really from the employer's lens. And what I wanted to do today was talk to you from an employee's perspective, everything from visas, which visa's right for me, all the way through to, I guess how they go about applying for opportunities. So we've got some good attendance and a lot of interest for this conversation. Not surprisingly, because actually Airswift do a survey every year. It's called our Getty report. We survey thousands of people across the world, and one of the questions we ask them is, where would they love to relocate to? And Australia every year comes up in the top 5. Actually, some of the reasons, firstly, would be lifestyle that they note, and then career opportunities. But I know that you're not from Australia. So why did you relocate here? And tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, it's a while ago now. It's 20 years this year. And to be honest with you, there was no planning involved. There was no research. It was completely by accident. I was actually traveling in Southeast Asia, and I realized I had left my passport in a hostel. So hitchhiked in the back of a truck to go across an island to go and retrieve it, and bumped into a couple of English people, and they were en route on their way to Australia. So they were like, why don't you join us? Come. So I think probably within 3 days, back in those days, I don't even know we had a mobile phone, and it's so old, but internet cafe, looked online, and within 3 days I was in Melbourne. It was that quick that I was able to obtain a working holiday visa. So still didn't think much of it, thought I'd probably be around for about a couple of months, if that. And then it just snowballed. Was just overwhelmed. There was so much opportunity at the time, got really lucky, found a fantastic company that wanted to sponsor me. So went through the 457, which is now the 482 visa. My employer then nominated me to get permanent residency, ran my own business, got married, became a citizen, and yeah, here we are 20 years later. So yeah, still have made it back home a few times, but yeah, didn't expect to be sat here with Sydney behind me right now, that's for sure.
I love that story.
But what
I haven't heard it before, and it started off a little bit shady. I thought there was going to be you bundled in the back of the boat.
That's a safe version. But I will say though that my experience or my journey, I mean, maybe the truck in Thailand was one thing, but it's not too dissimilar. So now, assisting loads of people to be able to live and work in Australia. The route of obtaining a working holiday visa and then getting sponsorship once you're over here and then onto permanent residency is a real common pathway. So the process still hasn't changed, and probably the processing times are pretty similar too. So we still see that a lot of young professionals are coming out here on that working holiday visa. Back in those days, there was quite a few select countries that had the opportunity. That's been growing. There's now 50 countries that have got the opportunity, if you're under the age of either 31 or 35, to come across for either 1 or up to 3 years on that program. And you can travel and you can work. And a lot of people use that to get a bit of experience and actually see if Australia is where they want to come. So I won't go through the 50 countries now, but if anyone's interested, I'm more than happy to share that information.
And they can probably find those on the Home Affairs site as well.
Yeah. There's a lot of information like that on Home Affairs as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So 50 countries, you can come up for 2 years, in summary. And Do you need any particular skills to be able to do that?
So not really for most countries, no. You just need to be under the age of 31 or under the age of 35. But you can only work for your employer for up to 6 months. So it's a good one if you're traveling and you're doing a little bit of work here and there. But if you want to be long term in Australia, you need to explore some of the other options that are available. So and there's a lot. So we can't go through all of them today. And we did talk a lot about the 482 visa in part one of the webinar that we did earlier on in the week. A lot of people initially will explore the independent routes to obtain permanent residency before they come out here to Australia. So that's the visa subclass 189 or state sponsorship 190. Now those visas are actually you don't need an employer. They're points-based assessment. So you obtain points based on your age, qualifications, number of years of experience that you've got overseas and also here in Australia, if that's applicable, and also marital status and the state that you're migrating in. So what happens with this process is that you to qualify, you need to have at least 65 points. You submit an expression of interest to the department, and the invitations go out on a monthly basis based on your occupation and based on how many points you've got. So it's pretty competitive. The higher the points that you've got, the more chances you are that you're going to be selected to then submit a visa application. But what I will say is that we're finding that you need at least 80 points to be able to receive an invitation. It can sometimes take quite a few rounds before those invitations come out. And then when you are invited to lodge an application, it can still take a significant amount of time for the permanent residency application to come through. So we've heard stories of people waiting 5 years now. But I would say normally you want to be expecting that whole process, obtaining, preparing all of the information and then waiting for the invitation round can be anywhere from a couple of months up to around about 12 to 18 months. So it's a bit of a slow process. It is a process. So that's why when we're talking about, the best way to get here, the employer sponsored, so potentially coming across on that 482 visa is going to be a more viable option or a faster option to actually get into Australia rather than waiting for the independent visa outside Australia. It's always something that you can explore later, but I would say the 482 is the best way to go but that does require sponsorship by an employer here in Australia.
Yeah. And are there any parameters which allow me to be more attractive to be sponsored? Or is there a checklist of things that I need to have to be able to qualify?
Well, it's all based on the occupation list. So if you've got an occupation which is on the skilled list and you have a degree qualification with at least 2 years of full-time work experience, competent English language and good health and character, then you're pretty much on your way. But it is very much dependent on getting that job first before you can apply for that visa.
Yeah. And are there any restrictions? Let's say I do secure that visa. You mentioned before on the working holiday, it's sort of 6 months at a time with each employer. Are there similar restrictions?
The visa for the 482 visa, the skilled visa, can be approved for either 2 years or 4 years, depending on your occupation. It's going to allow you to work here full time. You'll be able to work for your sponsoring employer. You'll be able to bring family across, and you'll be able to apply for permanent residency in the future. What it doesn't allow, though, is to be a contractor over here, to work part-time, or to work multiple, like extra jobs as well.
Okay, cool. Gotcha. So best opportunity for me to get in quickly, you mentioned, is that 482. You've mentioned some really quite long processes for the other visa. How long are we expecting for an application process for a 482?
Well, get your information ready. So you want to have your qualifications, employment references English language tests, and police checks where possible. Have all of that information ready to go. Once an application's lodged, the processing times for the 482 visa are not too bad in immigration terms. So we're looking at anywhere from a week to maybe 12 weeks. And I know it's a bit of a big difference, but there is a little bit of inconsistency with the processing times, but they're getting faster.
Yeah. And actually, I'm glad you touched on it, because from my experience, a lot of the delays are actually sitting on the employees' side of the fence, where it's taking a lot of time to gather all of that information, to go and, dig out old qualifications or copies of, etc., copies of, they're bringing spouses over, copies of, marriage certificates, etc. Where can somebody go to get a full list of what exactly I need to do to be prepared so that they are process ready?
We will, they can come to us. We're happy to have a chat with them about that, but we will also put together a checklist for you, Ryan, that you can share with anyone that's joining this webinar, so that they've got that information available.
Good stuff. And whilst you mention it, we've what we're going to be doing across both of our conversations is kind of condensing all of your great answers into a nice FAQ, and we'll be sharing that on our website for everybody to refer to. Okay, cool. Look, we've got loads of questions that have come to us from people who've added those in, and I think we should spend a bit of time answering some specific questions. Now, I'm going to make these nice and anonymous, but thank you in advance to everybody who has sent us through, and apologies if I can't read them out. There were quite a lot that came through. So the first one was, how do I apply for opportunities here in Australia? Now, I'll take that.
That's a question for you.
For me. So the first thing that I would say is do your homework. Now, Australia is not all about beaches and surfing. A lot of the opportunities that are coming up, particularly those opportunities where organizations are exploring international recruitment strategies, are in regional areas. So specifically for Airswift, we focus on the heavy engineering sectors, be that mining, infrastructure, energy, renewable energy. Those sorts of projects typically are not in the CBD. They're out in regional and rural areas. So before you start a process and get too excited about, I guess, applying for opportunities, what I would really encourage is for people to do their homework as to where are they actually applying to, because a lot of these places are, hours. Australia is a very, very large country, hours away from some of the facilities and, the things that you may be used to if, say, for example, you're coming from a big major capital city. The other thing to do is to have a look at the nuances of living and working here in Australia. Now, Airswift do create a relocation guide for each of the countries that we operate in, all 70. And our Australian one is available on our website. We do update that on a regular basis, and that will talk you through an overview of a number of different areas, be that from schooling through to the tax system, with links included as to where you can dig further into the information. Because I think one of the frustrating things for an employer is if they are to engage with you through a recruitment process, they want to know that you've done your homework and that you know what you're applying for. It is also quite an expensive process for the employer, and particularly nowadays, as the world has seemingly got that little bit bigger post-COVID, flights and travel alone are more expensive for them to relocate talent over. So the first thing I would really recommend is do your homework as to where you're actually applying for. Don't get me wrong, it's an amazing country, but you need to know what you're setting yourself up for. The next thing is to create some visibility of your profile and your skills and what you have available. So obviously you need to get your resume put together. And really try to make it relevant to the types of projects that we have here in Australia. Those hiring managers and employers are looking for, wherever possible, a like for like. They understand that you're going to need to know the geography and the locations of those projects. But wherever possible, they're looking for people in the mining sector who've worked on mining projects elsewhere. So make sure you make it relevant and detailed, and have a look at some of the projects that are happening here in Australia so that you can kind of cross-reference and pull out some nice things to highlight within your resume. The next thing is making that resume visible to people like Airswift, who can access your details readily when those international campaigns come up. So the best thing for you to do is for you to go onto our website. We have a platform that is currently called iContract. That's actually transforming to Airswift Digital. It's essentially a place for you to register your details, put in there all of your information, your key skills, the sector that you've worked in, geographies that you're open to hearing about work. And what will happen is every time one of our recruiters registers a vacancy for them internally to work on, you will be sent that vacancy if it is relevant and matched up to your profile. So it's a way for you to have work that's relevant being sent through to you to apply to. The third thing I would say, and sorry, to be able to access that if you're not going onto our website, is app.airswift.com. Now, the third thing I would say is get here to Australia and have a look around. I think that there's so much that can be said for that. The ability of organizing face-to-face meetings, recruiters themselves, Airswift and beyond are all going to be that much more engaged to work with somebody who has been here, who knows what it's like, who they can come and meet for a coffee, even if it's just for that holiday. So if you are genuinely interested, if possible, if financially viable, try and get yourself over here for a couple of weeks, and we can see if we can set you up with some relevant people. So hopefully that answers that. It's a typical Ryan Carroll, not a short answer, but it's an answer nonetheless. Okay, the next one. This is definitely for yourself, Bella.
Okay.
I'm 62 years old with a background in oil and gas for over 30 years. Will I still be able to access a visa in Australia given my age?
That is a really good question. It's a great question, actually, because a lot of the visa pathways do have age restrictions. So if you're applying for a 482, that skilled temporary visa that I was talking about, there is no age restriction, and it's a renewable visa. So potentially you can come over here as a temporary visa holder and continue to be a temporary visa holder until you're 102. There's no problem with that. But when it comes to permanent residency, the points-based visa pathways are closed. You have to be under the age of 45 to be eligible for those. So if you're over the age of 45, there is an exemption. You'd have to come across and work under the 482 visa, or potentially work in a regional area. But generally, you'd work under the 482 visa for 3 years, earning above the high income threshold, which is around about 180,000, then there is an exemption and a pathway to permanent residency. So if you're 62, yes, you can apply for a visa, definitely a temporary, and you may be able to apply for permanent residency in the future, depending on whether or not you can meet that exemption.
Excellent. Thank you, Bella. Hopefully that answers your question. Now, next one, and we've had a few actually come through from individuals based in Papua New Guinea. Maybe they tuned into our last webinar where you made reference to PNG, but they've asked around the visa process and how easy it is for a PNG resident or citizen, to be able to come over to Australia. Could you give us a quick synopsis?
Yes, look, so PNG recently became a country that's on the work and holiday visa program. So that definitely opens up doors for people that are coming across from PNG to potentially come across on that short-term visa. So that would be one way. But again, if you're in PNG and you've got a degree qualification and you've got some solid work experience, then again, employer-sponsored or employer-nominated route is probably a good option for you guys.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So we talked about this in the other conversation around, from an employer's perspective, which locations offer the path of least resistance. And I think that is quite important for this audience also to hear, because, you know, we can find ourselves being overlooked potentially in favor of other locations, because essentially the path of least resistance for an employer potentially also means it's faster for them to be able to get talent in, and it's also potentially going to be more cost effective. So they are more likely to look into those locations. So what sort of locations do you see present that path of ease?
Well, PNG, it does have an easy pathway because unlike some other countries that may, for certain occupations, require a skills assessment that can take a few months to obtain, that's not on the list. So for, say, electrical engineering, electricians, mechanical engineers, you wouldn't need to obtain the skills assessment as long as you've got a degree qualification, or if you've got at least 3 or 5 years of experience, depending on the occupation. So it can be quite straightforward if you're coming from that country. UK, Ireland, no problems at all, really. Those countries will be much faster to come in to Australia.
Awesome. So UK, Ireland, PNG. Anywhere else closer to home?
Home is in Australia.
Australia, yeah, that's not hard.
Yeah, look, New Zealand is obviously going to be an easy option to come into Australia and work here as well. Indonesia, they are pretty good to go as well. So yeah, look, generally, you know, there's no country which is forbidden or anything along those lines. It's just more that certain countries may have to do additional health checks or skills assessments, which just takes a little bit longer. That's all. So it's not as if any place is sort of off limits.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, next question. Again for you. I want to know, if I have basic English communication skills, does that restrict me? And what level of English is acceptable? So, yeah, how do we kind of unpackage that? English language is obviously important. That's the first language here.
So different visas have got different English language requirements. So generally temporary visas is a little bit easier than the permanent visas. So anyone that wants to understand about that, I would definitely recommend going onto the Home Affairs website, because they've got a huge amount of information about the scores that are required, because there's several different types of test centers that you can go to. PTE, IELTS is the most popular. It's international, it's global. There's test centers all around the world. They've also got a fantastic website, and I don't work for them, I promise I don't get commissions with it, but they've got a fantastic website where you can see what the test questions look like. You can go through tutorials and practice runs, because basically you really need to have a minimum of competent English for if you're a primary visa holder for any of the skilled migration programs here in Australia.
And so is that for any country where English is not the first language, you're going to need to do an English test?
The only exemptions from the English language would be UK, Ireland, US, Canada, and New Zealand. Everywhere else, South Africa is still required to do English language test as well.
Yeah, wow. Okay. Next question, and this again is a very popular one, or popular topic. How can somebody access PR status? So you have kind of touched on that earlier, but do you want to kind of unpack that again for us?
Yeah, so again, we've got the independent route. So we've got the points-based assessment, which is you don't need to have an employer for that pathway, but you do need to have a minimum of 65 points, ideally 80. You lodge an expression of interest and wait for the government to invite you to apply for PR. So that's one option. The other option, like myself, you sponsored on a temporary work visa, and then after a specified period of time, your employer can nominate you for permanent residency. That's the 186 route. And then there's also 191 visa. That's for where you've been working in a regional area for about 3 years, and then you're able to obtain permanent residency that way. So there are, and without going through each one of the requirements, there's a fair few different pathways to get to PR. But across all of those, the common denominator is always your occupation, being on the occupation list, and your skills and qualifications. And of course, with all Australian visas, good health and character, but predominantly permanent residency is about skilled migration program. We touched on it last time. 70% of all migration in Australia is based on skills. The other ways, the other routes are family streams and partner, parents, those types of visas, which is, there's sometimes a long wait for those types of visas, and they can often be a lot harder than going down the skill route.
Excellent. And if somebody were to reach that threshold to be able to apply for permanent residency, is there an additional cost to convert that from being on the visa to going on to your permanent residency?
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, you've got to apply for a whole new visa when you're going for permanent residency, as with any visa actually. And the prices are going to vary depending on, the streams for permanent residency are all quite similar in terms of the Home Affairs fees, but it can vary depending on your occupation, the size of your employer, and also family members that are migrating with you. So generally here in Australia, in Australian dollars, to apply for permanent residency could be anywhere from about 10,000 Aussie dollars up to about 17. That's sort of ballpark figure for most of the visa applications.
Excellent, thank you. And from my experience, there is generally no rule of thumb or precedent that the employer would actually cover that for you. I've seen it happen where it's then, built back into your contract that if you were to leave, you'd have to pay that back. But I've also seen equal in measure that it's not covered.
There's only a tiny part legally that the business would have to pay for. So it really varies from company to company about that. But generally, when it comes to permanent residency, the employee or the visa applicant will incur those costs.
Yeah. Okay. I've got another question. This is somebody who's currently working in Denmark, and they are a UK and Australian citizen. They're thinking about returning to Australia. Their girlfriend is not Australian. Would it be possible to bring the girlfriend over as well? And will she be able to work?
Well, yeah. What you could do then. So first of all, the partner is from Denmark.
So the individual is both a Australian and UK citizen.
Yeah.
Even though they're from Denmark. So
okay.
Yeah. So we could potentially ignore the Denmark piece for this because they are also an Australian citizen. Just throwing that in there to send you off track. But they are an Australian citizen. Girlfriend is not. And so
if they are married or girlfriends, so if they've been in a de facto, if they've been living together for 12 months, then it's very likely that the partner could be eligible for a partner visa. That can be applied for either outside of Australia, a 309 visa, or it can also be applied for inside Australia. Now, I would be suggesting that potentially we explore if they could apply for a working holiday visa first so that they can come and work, because they could potentially come out here as a visitor, but they wouldn't have work rights initially. What you do in that instance is that as a visitor, if you lodge a visa application in Australia, you're automatically granted a bridging visa. When their visitor visa ends, so after 3 months, they would go on to a bridging visa. It would activate work rights, and then they could work while the application's in process. So it sounds to me like they would probably be eligible for a partner visa, and they probably would get work rights, but not straight away, perhaps after a couple of months.
That is why you're an expert, Bella. Brilliant. Okay, there's a bit of duplication through the rest of these questions, so I'm going to leave it there. You've been outstanding as before. I really, really appreciate your time and your insights, and hopefully everybody who tuned in as well has enjoyed this as much as me. A couple of things, I guess, next steps or recommendations for everybody. Bella is obviously a great source of information, but a lot of that is readily available on the EPG migration website, and you can also follow them on LinkedIn.
Yes, any updates will come out on LinkedIn, so do follow, and then you'll get alerts when there's any changes. And there are likely to be a lot of immigration changes happening. We've been told so by the government in the next sort of three months. So it's definitely worth following there to get that, because we can't always respond to every inquiry that comes through.
Brilliant. And from a job application perspective, a few things for you to do is to head straight to the Airswift website and check out that iContract, which is soon to be Airswift Digital. That is the registration process where, again, whatever information you put in there will build your profile, and the most relevant opportunities that we're working on will be sent your way. For you to also follow us on LinkedIn, there's lots of information that we provide, and for you to also check out our website for other blogs that we've been doing. We are recently putting a lot of these videos onto YouTube, so I do encourage you, this is very Gen Z of me, but I do encourage you to subscribe and to follow Airswift on YouTube. So Bella, thank you very much again. It's very late where you are. Have a lovely evening. And
night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.